What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to get straight into it. We're going to talk about my top 24 wide receivers in tiers, all the good stuff for week 15 of the fantasy football season. At this point, it is playoff season. It's time to get down to business and talk about these players. Now, with that being said, we're not going to waste any time. We're not going to do any rambling, any talking about my bad haircut. We're going to get right into the football. With that being said, if you're new here, we post fantasy football videos pretty much daily. And if that's your thing, make sure you go down below. Subscribe if you're new. Leave a like. It helps out the boy a ton. Leave a like. It helps out the boy a ton in the algorithm. With that being said, let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm critical.
All right, so with these wide receivers, we're going to have them S tier, A tier, all the way through. And these are my rankings at this point in the week. I wrote this outline today. It's Wednesday. We're getting absolutely clobbered by COVID. So there's a ton of things that, could change from now until, when the games happen on Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. So this is just a rough estimate of how I feel and just kind of go more off the tiers and the individual rankings themselves. Now, these will all be finalized on Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be down below in the description. It'll be down below in the comments. So make sure you check that out if you want to see the full thing. I rank like 50 running backs, 60 wide receivers. It's a whole big thing every single week. Now, with that being said, at the top of S tier, we have 3 wide receivers at that wide receiver 1 chair. We have Cooper Kupp. The man is balling out of his goddamn mind. He is the Larry Bird of our generation. I can't remember the last time that there was a wide receiver that looked like Cooper Kupp that wasn't Hunter Renfrow, Cole Beasley looking, Julian Edelman looking, those tiny slot, Wes Welker, those tiny little slot guys. Cooper Kupp is dominating the league right now. He has like 20 or more receptions than the guy in second place for receptions. He has like over 100 receptions, 1,400 plus receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. Like, what the guy is doing is unprecedented. He is averaging 25.8 PPR points per game. He is the single highest scoring player in all of fantasy, even against running backs. That's so rare. Like, not only is he having a wide receiver 1 season, he is having an insane season. Jonathan Taylor, the highest scoring running back, only has 23.7 points per game. And that's nothing to scoff at. 23.7 points per game is amazing, but Kupp has 25.8. Like, we don't see that. And with Kupp, it's not even worth talking about his matchup. He's going to be at home against Seattle. I don't care what the matchup is. Obviously, you fire up Cooper Kupp. Seattle, for what it's worth, is the 5th worst defense in pass DVOA. So that's going to be in a matchup where Cooper Kupp could just go out there, absolutely light them up. At wide receiver 2, we have Davante Adams. He's going to be in Baltimore. And Cooper Kupp used to be in a tier of his own, but we're going to put 2 other guys that I think are worthy of being next to Cooper Kupp at this point. And Davante Adams is one of those guys as one of 3 wide receivers that have averaged over 24 points per game in the last 5 weeks. It's been Cooper Kupp, it's been Davante Adams, it's been Justin Jefferson. We're going to put Davante Adams in here. Now, Baltimore seems like a scary matchup on the surface, but they're actually a really good pass funnel, which means they plug up the run and they force you to pass on them. They have the 4th best rush DVOA and the 26th best pass DVOA. So this is a team that can stop the run much better than can stop the pass. I think that's going to shift the Packers towards, kind of dotting up that secondary. I want to say Marlon Humphrey is hurt at this point, so Davante Adams could just go absolutely crazy on the secondary. We saw Jamar Chase make an absolute fool out of the secondary. I want to say like week 7, week 6, something in that range. We just touched on him before, but Justin Jefferson is our last wide receiver in S tier. He's going to be in Chicago, and Justin Jefferson has, at this point, he has a case to be the wide receiver 1 overall on a weekly basis. Now with Thielen out, you can kind of put Jefferson up there. Jefferson, over the last 5 weeks, is averaging the most fantasy points per game from any wide receiver. He is averaging 25.9 points per game, even after vastly underperforming his expected output on Thursday Night Football. We know expected points are a really good measure of how much a player was supposed to get based on his targets, based on his ADOT, based on his end zone targets, all of the volume that he received. How much points should he have put up? He should have put up 32.3 points on Thursday night. He would have been the wide receiver 1 in points. He was the wide receiver 1 in expected points. He only put up 20.5 points. Now, that's nothing to scoff at, obviously. That's still a massive, 20-point game. But it goes to show that he underperformed what he should have had by 12.3 points. So he went from the wide receiver 1 in expected to the wide receiver 9 on the week, which is a crazy, discrepancy. And that's not that Justin Jefferson isn't talented enough to exceed his expectation. It's just that he got unlucky last week, and I'm just trying to paint the picture of what his volume has been like in an Adam Thielen-less world. I think that kind of works. Adam Thielen-less world. Now, this week against Chicago has an absolute layup matchup against the Bears, who are allowing the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Now, moving on from S tier, we have a really small tier and A tier, and both of these guys feel like they should be in S tier, but they're just on the outside of it, especially this guy who is Tyreek Hill at wide receiver 4. He's a guy that I've grouped in all season with, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, all those guys, but the sad truth is that Tyreek Hill hasn't been to that standard as of recently. He's the wide receiver 15 in points per game in his last 5, averaging only 15.8 points per game. So that's not, elite wide receiver 1 S tier type status at this point. I still think he has the talent for that. I still think that he is, the Tyreek Hill that we know and love. And I love him in this matchup in Los Angeles. We talked about this yesterday. This is the matchup of the week. The matchup that could be a shootout, could be the, Jared Goff versus Patrick Mahomes Monday night game, or was it a Sunday night game? I think it was a Monday night game. It was like 54-51. I'm saying it has that potential. It has that potential. Herbert versus Mahomes, primetime. I would love to see both of these teams put up more than 35 points. We'll see what happens. As of right now, highest over-under on the slate with 52 points in the over-under. So when you have that many points being scored, Tyreek Hill is probably going to find a way to get loose, especially being so cold recently. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Tyreek Hill bomb game right here. Then at wide receiver 5, we have Deontay Johnson, who's going to be at home against Tennessee. And Deontay is quietly somebody that should be in consideration for S tier at this point. He is not in that top 3, but he is the next wide receiver up in points per game over his last 5 games. He is averaging 20.1 points per game. In my book, any wide receiver that is averaging over 20 points per game over at the minimum a 5-game stretch is performing at an elite level. Deontay Johnson is doing just that. Him, Kupp, and Devontae Adams are the only wide receivers right now with a 30% or better target share. So what Deontay Johnson is doing, he's commanding a lot of targets. He's producing 20-plus points per game. He is a high-end wide receiver 1 right now, and he has a really light matchup this week. He's going to be playing at home against Tennessee, who is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Then our last wide receiver in this tier is Deebo Samuel, who's a little bit banged up right now. He had that groin injury that kept him out for a week. I still do feel like it's holding him back slightly. His usage has been really weird. I'm still going to put him up this high because you have to just keep ranking him high until he disappoints. He keeps going crazy. He's been averaging 20 points per game in his last 5 games, regardless of where he's finding those points. The thing is that he's finding the points in an unsustainable way. But again, I have him at wide receiver 6. It's not like I have him at wide receiver 12 and I'm fading Deebo. I'm just making you aware that how he's scoring his points is of the likes of which I've never witnessed before. He had 3% of his team's targets last week, but he had 8 carries for 37 yards and a touchdown. He only had 1 reception. He is listed as a wide receiver, but he is out here making his bread and butter on really long runs, really long touchdown runs, which is unsustainable over the long term. But again, I'm willing to kind of just bet on him sustaining. He's going to be playing at home against Atlanta. It's a very easy matchup. They're allowing the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and Deebo is just going to get his 12 to 15 at minimum points. And the way he does it, we're not sure at this point, but it's kind of just, it's magic. He's out there. He's either going to do it on the ground. He's going to do it outside as a wide receiver. He's going to do it as a quarterback. At this point, he is a magician. But you know what else is absolutely magical, almost mind-boggling how it's even possible? And you know what else is magic, fellas? The Lawnmower 4.0 in its skin-safe technology. You can get in there like a fencer, like Freddie Benson. You can get in there like it's Game of Thrones, go crazy, and not scratch a single thing. You don't want your nuts to be looking like a Freddy Krueger horror scene below the waist. It would just be a bad look for the brand, for the basement brand. Now with the Lawnmower 4.0, it has a ceramic guard, as you guys can see. That little white piece in front of the blade, or in front of the razor, is a guard to keep your nuts safe, to keep them smooth. And on top of that, it is not only protected, but it's a great performance razor. It's waterproof. It has a light on it so you know what you're doing. You can hear the 7,000 RPM motor. It also has a great brush. I'm telling you guys, no one else is talking about this. You got the razor, you got the brush. You give it a nice little 1-2, bang. Good as new. It doesn't have to be all like clogged up with hair. You can't do that with other razors, fellas. And if you want all this information, go onto their website, manscaped.com. When you go to checkout, use my promo code RON for 20% off your entire order and free shipping. I'm telling you guys, the holidays are coming around. It's the best present for your dad, brother, uncle, brother-in-law. Any male in your family would enjoy this present. I'm telling you guys, it is clean, it is great, and it's an essential for male grooming. Now make sure you go hop onto manscaped.com, snag one of these Lawnmower 4.0s using promo code RON for 20% off and free shipping. Now with that being said, let's get into B tier. In B tier, we have the not so elite wide receiver ones, but I like these guys as, firm mid-range wide receiver ones. And the first guy we're going to list here is Chris Godwin at wide receiver 7. He's been on an absolute tear. We talked about this in the top 10 lessons learned show. He has been the wide receiver 2 over the last 2 weeks without a single touchdown. It has been because he's caught over 25 balls on a 32.9% target share. The touchdowns will come, and he has a great matchup this week at home against the Saints, who are allowing the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. At wide receiver 8, we have Keenan Allen, who missed last week, but he should be good to go. Mike Williams showed last week that he's not that guy. Keenan Allen is the main wide receiver in this offense. Even with Keenan Allen gone, Mike Williams still only had like 5-6 catches, underperformed. Keenan Allen is the main wide receiver in this offense, and I love this matchup. He's going to be at home against Kansas City. We talked about this with Tyreek Hill. We talked about this with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We talked about this with Austin Eckler. We want as many skill position players in this matchup. This is going to be a 52-point over-under. Justin Herbert versus Pat Mahomes. I'm praying for a shootout. It should be absolute fireworks. Next up, we have Stephon Diggs at wide receiver 9, who's been solid. He's the wide receiver 5 in expected points per game over the last 5 weeks, so the volume has been there, and it's been a little bit better than it was in the beginning of the season. He has a tough matchup at home against Carolina, but at the end of the day, it's Stephon Diggs, and I'm not ranking him outside of my top 10 wide receivers. Then we have our C tier of wide receivers, and these guys are fringe wide receiver ones that I still like a lot, but I just can't put any higher than this, if that makes sense. And the first guy we're going to talk about is CeeDee Lamb. And the biggest plus for CeeDee Lamb and all of these Dallas pass catchers has been the banged up running back room. We have Tony Pollard with, like a plantar fasciitis? I don't even know what it is, to be honest with you. But he has some kind of foot injury. We have Zeke Elliott with a knee injury to the point where Corey Clement is getting a bunch of rush attempts. They want to pass the ball at this point. Shout out to Dwayne McFarland. All of the snap percentages, all of the rush attempt percentages, all of that stuff is from his utilization report over on Pro Football Focus. Dwayne McFarland is one of the best in the game. If I do start having guests on next offseason, which I think I might, we'll see. But Dwayne McFarland is genuinely up there on I wouldn't say my Mount Rushmore, but of dudes that I really, really respect, he's up there. So Dwayne McFarland, and he doesn't even know who I am. But so Dwayne McFarland is really, really good. He comes out with a utilization report every week on PFF. One of the best articles, one of the best pieces of content you need to consume on a weekly basis to stay on top of the fantasy landscape. And he said that the Dallas Cowboys, since week 9, they are 3rd in regulation dropbacks per game. So not counting overtime, but they're getting a lot of dropbacks. They're passing the ball a ton. Whereas in the beginning of the season, they were actually leaning on their run game. Their defense was playing really well. So that's a really good change of pace for a guy like CeeDee Lamb. He's going to be playing in New York against the Giants, who are allowing the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. This should be a really good matchup for all of the Dallas pass catchers. Then at wide receiver 11, we have Mike Evans, and a whole tier below Chris Godwin, and he's kind of getting outshined by him at this point, but I will say Mike Evans doesn't have the same floor, right? He's not seeing 32.9% of the targets. I don't think that he'll ever see that with Tom Brady, but Evans is always due for those huge touchdown spike games. This could easily be him against Marshawn Lattimore. I think that Marshawn Lattimore usually has Mike Evans' number, but at the same time, I don't buy into that a whole lot. I think that this could be a game where Mike Evans kind of feels due for a 30-point bomb, first round of the playoffs. It just makes sense. The New Orleans Saints allowing the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. This could be a Mike Evans bomb, especially with Chris Godwin going off so recently. You could see, all right, this is kind of a hand in the dirt take, but you could see the other team kind of, game planning for Chris Godwin instead of Mike Evans, because Chris Godwin has been the one that's kind of been tearing up defenses as of recently. Then you could get that Mike Evans pop-off game pretty easily. After that, at wide receiver 12, we have Jamar Chase, who's low-key back. He scored 20-plus points for the first time since week 7. He went crazy. You had the Joe Burrow improvised play, found Chase in the back of the end zone. I don't know how he kept his feet in balance to avoid the illegal touching call. Regardless, it was amazing. Maybe that kind of snaps things back into, rhythm for him and Joe Burrow. And this week he's going to be in Denver. Not a great matchup. It's pretty much a neutral matchup, but we saw last week that ceiling, that 20-plus point ceiling that he has on a weekly basis where he can get 2 touchdowns, 100-plus yards. That's why we keep firing him up as a top 12 wide receiver. At wide receiver 13, we have Hunter Renfrow in Cleveland. Hunter Renfrow has finally earned his spot as a top 13 guy. This is his first time, I think, in my top 24 rankings, but I can't, at this point, rank him any lower. And for those of you guys out there, I get comments that are are you going to put respect on Renfrow's name now? look, fellas, I had a video where I talked about like my rest of season risers, like my playoff guys. I had Hunter Renfrow on that list of a guy that I think should be rising up boards before it was even cool. And on top of that, in an analyst league, I can show you guys the receipts. I went out there, I traded for Hunter Renfrow. I gave up a second for him like a month or two ago. Now he's worth like 2 seconds. So put some respect on my name. Also, the guys in the Patreon, they know. I put it out weeks ago. I had a huge buy and sell list in the Dynasty Discord. Bang, Hunter Renfrow was one of my biggest buys a few months ago. So for you guys out there that are talking, I don't put respect on Hunter Renfrow's name. I put respect on Hunter Renfrow's name, and the guys that are the real ones, they know that I put respect on Hunter Renfro's name. Now, with that being said, he is the wide receiver 7 in points per game over his last 5 games. He is the wide receiver 12 in expected points over that span. So he is overperforming his volume to a certain degree, but he's still top 12 in expected points per game. He is still getting wide receiver 1 type volume, which is just absolutely insane for Hunter Renfrow. Now, he's going to be on the road against Cleveland. Pretty much a neutral matchup. They're not amazing. They're not bad. The thing is that Hunter Renfrow has just been on an absolute tear. He's been exploding. So at this point, you kind of just have to respect the upside of Hunter Renfrow. But then we have Tyler Lockett at wide receiver 14. He just put up 142 yards and a touchdown. The Seahawks kind of feel back. Now, I know it was against the Texans, but Russell Wilson had his highest passing grade on PFF since before his mallet finger injury. And they're going to be playing in LA against the Rams. And Jalen Ramsey was put on the COVID list on Monday. I don't think that he is going to be ready to play for Sunday. So this is a depleted secondary. I know they have Taylor Rapp and some good like safeties / like nickel guys, but their corners for this week are David Long, Darius Williams, and a guy named Kareem Orr. I have never heard of any of those 3 guys. I will say that I'm not a defensive guy anyways, but none of those guys feel like an absolute a threat at all to Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf. PFF, in fact, has Lockett with the biggest advantage over opposing cornerbacks this week on PFF. Metcalf is also up there as well. They're both really good plays in what could be a potential shootout. This could be a game where the Seahawks beat the Rams. All of these NFC West teams have like a round robin where like, you know, you'll have the Rams beat the Cardinals, but then the Cardinals will beat the Seahawks, and then the Seahawks will beat the Rams. Like they all have this weird thing where they all, you know, kind of beat up on each other. So this could be a game where the Seahawks go out there and outduel the Rams. Now, I know that's a wild thing to say, but it's in the range of outcomes. Now, moving on from the Seahawks wide receivers, at wide receiver 16, first wide receiver of D tier. These guys are still amazing. These are my firm wide receiver 2s, just guys I'm not comfortable putting in the wide receiver 1 conversation yet. And I'll be honest with you, you can argue that Jalen Waddle here should be higher. I think when it's all said and done and I sit down and rank these on Thursday, I might have him higher than wide receiver 16 because he has just been amazing. Outside of Debo, Deontay, Devontae Adams, Kupp, and Justin Jefferson, he is the wide receiver 6 in points per game over the last 5 weeks. Now he's playing at home against the Jets. They're going to absolutely destroy the Jets. The Jets have the worst pass DVOA defense. This is going to be an absolute smash spot for Jalen Waddle. Then we have T. Higgins, who produced last week even during a Jamar Chase explosion week. Jamar Chase had like 77 yards, 2 touchdowns. T. Higgins still had 5 catches, 114 yards. He now has 3 straight games with 100 receiving yards or more. He's going to be on the road against Denver. Not a juicy matchup. They're pretty much neutral, but at this point, with Higgins, you know, going so crazy without even scoring a lot of touchdowns, he's a must-start wide receiver, just given the recent production. Next up at wide receiver 18, we have Marquise Hollywood Brown. He's going to be playing at home against Green Bay, and he's this low for 2 reasons. One being that he has been underperforming. I still do think that Marquise Brown should be like a top 15 wide receiver. It's just tough because he's been the wide receiver 19 in expected points per game over his last 5 weeks. So he's cooling off here, especially in the volume department. He's not getting as much targets, as many looks as he was earlier on in the season. And he's also lower on this list because with Lamar Jackson, if he's hurt, Tyler Huntley isn't a guy that I want passing my wide receiver the ball often, right? Now, regardless, he's my wide receiver 18. This is a neutral matchup against Green Bay. There should be some scoring here. I just like Marquise Brown to bounce back eventually. I'm moving on to E tier. We have my fringe wide receiver 2s here, and I don't even really feel great about Amari Cooper at wide receiver 19. I don't feel great about anybody after Hollywood Brown, to be honest with you. Now, with Amari Cooper, we know the Cowboys are passing more. We talked about that with CeeDee Lamb, and the problem is that he's been the wide receiver 38 in points per game over his last 5 games. So even with that bump in volume, he still hasn't been amazing. Now, he has a little bit of a get-right spot here. The Giants are allowing the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, so they could just, beat up on the Giants. We'll see how that goes. I'm still not comfortable at ranking him outside of my top 20 wide receivers, just given how good that offense is and how many points they scored, but it is, something worth mentioning with Amari Cooper. Then we have at wide receiver 20, Brandon Ayuk at home against Atlanta. And Ayuk, really all depends on if Kyle Shanahan is going to use Debo primarily as a running back or if he wants to switch him back to wide receiver, because with Elijah Mitchell coming back, if he gets Debo Samuel back to like his 30% target share, then Ayuk gets kind of marginalized. But things are trending in the direction that Debo is still going to be a primary ball carrier, maybe mix around in like the 2 to 4 target range. And if that happens, then Ayuk is a nice start. He saw 30% of the targets last week. He's the wide receiver 21 over his last 5 games, and Atlanta allows the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, so it is a nice matchup for Ayuk. It just depends on how much volume Debo ends up taking at the end of the day. Now at wide receiver 21, we have DJ Moore, who's a really tough rank right now because he is the wide receiver 23 over his last 5 games, so he's been really consistent, but he hasn't shown his ceiling since like early on in the season. It sucks, man. It's annoying as well because Joe Brady is good for that offense. Joe Brady is in my opinion, at the very least, an above-average OC. Matt Rule fired him, which I think was unfair. His quarterbacks clearly let him down. Now, you can't fire a guy because Sam Darnold sucks, Cam Newton sucks, and PJ Walker sucks. Like, saying that Joe Brady was the problem, I think, is the wrong approach there. I think the problem is that you guys decided to draft J.C. Horn, a corner, over Justin Fields and Mac Jones. Made no sense at the time. Still makes no sense. I don't care if J.C. Horn is an all-pro cornerback. The process does not make sense there. Now, regardless, DJ Moore has a hamstring injury, but he should be good to go. As long as he plays, he's seen 28% of the targets in his last 3 games, 28% of the targets or more in his last 3 games. Now, he just needs to find some efficiency for a boom week because the volume has been there. I think that he can find the end zone very soon. He has a nice floor around that 14 to 16 point range. He just has a tough matchup this week against Buffalo, in Buffalo. It should be a negative game script, though. 10.5 point dogs are going to throw the ball a ton. It really just comes down to, DJ Moore, if he can just sneak into the end zone early and get you he can get you something like 8 for 90 and a touchdown. That could be a nice DJ Moore line that you guys have coming your way. We will see about that. Then we have F tier, and these guys are just, it gets ugly here. I'm going to be honest with you guys. We have Brandon Cooks up first at wide receiver 22. This is where I really miss Elijah Moore. This is where he would have been. It sucks that Elijah Moore got put on IR, but with Brandon Cooks, he put up 8 catches for 101 yards last week against Seattle. I kind of really like this matchup for Cooks. He's going to be in Jacksonville. Jacksonville has the 2nd worst pass DVOA defense. Should be a competitive game. Houston versus Jacksonville, they both suck, but it should be a game where the game script doesn't get too wonky like it has in the past. So that should be a game where things are close. There's going to be enough passing. It's an easy matchup, and Cooks looked nice last week. So I like him as a top 24 wide receiver. Then at wide receiver 23, we have Mike Williams. He's going to be at home against Kansas City. And the only thing I can really say about him is, last week, no Keenan Allen. He didn't ball out. What you're doing here is you're just betting on a touchdown or maybe a touchdown or 2. This is hard to trust Mike Williams, but he is that boom bust guy that he's always been. Even when he hasn't been good in the past, he's always been a boom bust wide receiver. I think he's in that range this week against Kansas City in that 52.5 over-under game. He has a ton of touchdown potential. He could have a stat line of like 5 for 80 and 2 touchdowns. That's 100% in his range of outcomes. So you kind of have to respect that. And especially in a playoff week where you want those big boom weeks, I'm going to have him as my wide receiver 23. Then our last wide receiver on this list, wide receiver 24, who I would call Mike Williams East or Mike Williams North, whatever you want to call him, is Michael Pittman Jr. Michael Pittman Jr. is in a similar build where he is that big play wide receiver that gets a ton of touchdowns. It's kind of boomer bust. And last week he actually played pretty well. He had 17 points. He's also getting open at a wild rate. Another stat from Dwayne McFarland, Michael Pittman is getting open at the 5th highest rate against man coverage, which is really, really impressive. He's a good route runner. He's a solid route runner. We saw that in reception perception where he was charting out very good. Now, I think fringe wide receiver 2 sounds about right. He's playing against the Patriots, who are like a top 5 pass defense. Belichick is always known for kind of shutting down the team's best player. Now, I will say that does kind of open things up for Belichick to want to shut down Jonathan Taylor and force the Colts to beat him any other way. Just say, okay, we're going to shut down Jonathan Taylor. If you want to beat us through the air, then beat us through the air. And that could open up a high ceiling for Michael Pittman. Now, that's going to do it for us today, fellas. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like if you want access to these full rankings. They're on Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be in the description. It'll be down below in the comments. I love you guys. I'm going to get to these rest of season rankings. As always, I will see you guys in the next one.
Yep. Juice, 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 juice. Yep. 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 Yep.